Okay, good morning, everybody. I am going to start out doing something I usually don't do, which is apologizing that I am under the weather. So if I pause to cough or take a nose-blowing break, please bear with me. I have been on the speaking circuit for a couple of weeks now, nonstop. I was just in Philadelphia last week, and now I'm here, and I am from Long Island originally, so this was about an 8-hour train ride, so I think there was going to be a mutiny against me yesterday for all my nose blowing on the Amtrak, but here we are. I'm here. I'm really excited to be here, and we're going to talk about self-direction. So I want to preface this by saying that a lot of you may know self-direction in the OPWDD sense. Am I right in saying that? So, an actual self-directed plan with a circle of support and things like that. So we're definitely going to touch on that, but I'm using the broader definition of self-direction, which is simply directing your own life. Because I don't think you need to have any form of plan from OPWDD to be in charge of your own life, whether or not you have a disability. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit about who I am, and in case you can't see what the sign says, it says disability rights are women's rights are human rights. That's a photo from the Women's March in New York City back in January. And if you can kind of tell, the spokes of the wheel, and this has nothing to do with anything, I'm just proud of it, the spokes of the wheel are little female gender symbols. So I was just having a little fun with that. But anyway, so who am I and why are you going to listen to me today? I am, of course, the leader of a self-directed life. I have played an active role in making all the decisions that got me literally to this moment here today. I am a communications consultant. So that's just some jargon for I run social media and I run outreach and I do lots of communicating for different organizations, all focused on disability. I'm also a speaker, which you may or may not agree with by the end of the day. We'll see how you feel. I am an activist. So that takes on many forms. One in particular, which was mentioned, was the Women's March. So I originally had no intention to participate in the Women's March at all because I saw that disability was not included in the platform. And I then decided, why take a back seat when I can direct where I would like this to go? So I wrote an article about it, and I connected with the organizers of the Women's March, and I asked them to please include disability in their platform, which leads me to the next thing that I do, which is writing. I write a lot. Haven't written in a couple of months because I've been focusing on speaking, but I write about disability a lot for mainstream outlets. So this includes the New York Times, Huffington Post, things like that. So I'm really trying to get out of the echo chamber that we often find ourselves in working in the disability field and educate the people who don't already know what's going on. And then I am a proud disabled woman. So I know some of you must be looking at this puzzled, saying, why did I not use person-first language? What are you doing, Emily? Why aren't you honoring person-first language over here? So I'm going to let you know right off the bat, I use something called identity-first language. And so that means that I consider disability to be a part of my identity. Just as much as I am female, just as much as I am Jewish, just as much as I wear glasses, I'm a disabled woman. That is not for everyone, nor do I say that that is the only way to identify yourself. But for me, it was sort of a reclamation of something that is viewed as a negative term and not separating it from myself by saying that I am a person with a disability, because my disability is not something that I carry in a suitcase with me. It's something that is literally part of who I am. So today you're going to hear me go back and forth between person with a disability, disabled person. Please don't be hesitant to ask questions about that, but just know this is a safe space to use whichever language you feel most comfortable with, and we'll just kind of work on respecting each other's language choices and communicating however we feel most comfortable. So I like to give that heads up because I know some people are like, why are you calling yourself disabled? It can be a source of contention. Next slide, please. So this is a smattering of what I do. I was talking a little bit about it earlier. Words I Wheel By is my personal website, and that is what I started out doing about 4 years ago at this point. It was a blog, and I thought I would be lucky if my grandmother read it. It turns out that a few more people than my grandmother read it, but my grandmother still does read it, so I consider that a win. I also work for Rooted in Rights. I will be showing you a video from Rooted in Rights later on today. So how many of you have heard of or have seen anything from Rooted in Rights? Because if not, I'm going to ask you all right now to write that down, go home, and take a look at it. So I think I saw like 2 hands, and they were Susan and Joyce. Oh, did I see 3? And Seneca. Okay. All right. So Rooted in Rights is a storytelling platform and disability rights issues platform, and I am the editor-in-chief of their blog, but I'm also a storyteller for them. And what that means is that I literally worked with them to create my story from start to finish. That is as literal self-direction as you can get. I directed my own story, turned it into a video, shared it online, and that was how we educated people about disability. And we do this with tons of people. Later on, for the panel, you're going to meet Jensen. He's also a Rooted in Rights storyteller. So there's a little bit of connection going on here. And the blogs that I edit are all people telling their stories in the context of broader disability rights issues. So if you want to learn about disability straight from the horse's mouth, that's the place to check out. So the next place that I work for is Concepts, and that is where I do federal contract work with the U.S. Department of Labor, Office of Disability Employment Policy. I bring this up because sometimes people can see, if they Google me for whatever reason, that I'm affiliated with some government initiatives, but I am in no way representing the government. I am all Emily all the time today, but I do work on a lot of disability employment-related initiatives through the Office of Disability Employment Policy. Then there is Sibling Leadership Network. Are any of you familiar with that in here? Yeah? Are any of you siblings of people with disabilities in here? Okay, so Sibling Leadership Network is a really great resource for siblings of people with disabilities who want to be advocates and who want to have a source of community. So not only do I work directly with people who have disabilities, but I also work with people who are allies, who are family members, who are supporters. So I really try to look at disability very holistically. Then there is Able Thrive, which is a platform for resources for people with varying disabilities. You can go on, you can enter in information about your disability, and it will curate resources for you. And you might be wondering why I'm spending so much time telling you the things that I do, but everything that I work on is pretty strategic. I want them to be resources for other people. So I hope maybe you'll hear something that you can take back to someone today. And if they have a question, if they say, my brother with a disability really needs help with something, you can say, oh, I just heard this presentation, and they mentioned the Sibling Leadership Network. Let's check it out. So everything I do because I want to be a resource to the broader disability community. And then this one's a shameless plug. It's my baby. It's the Accessible Stall podcast. Anybody a fan of podcasts in here? I have a podcast that I've been running for a little over a year now, focused on disability. What a shocker. And I talk about everything from the silly issues like playing games and accessibility to the very serious, like sexual assault. So everything is through a disability lens. And that's sort of my grassroots way of educating people in a form of media that's maybe not so saturated with disability. So now you have a little bit of an idea of who you're talking to and why I am hopefully qualified to be informing you today. Next slide, please. So now we're going to get into a little bit how I self-directed my life. So here is a picture from elementary school, and I'm sort of in the middle. I am not in my wheelchair. I'm like right behind the sign. I wasn't using a wheelchair as much when I was younger. However, my teacher, if you might notice, was in a wheelchair. So this was second grade. My parents and I actually talked things over before I started second grade. And they said, there's a teacher in a wheelchair in your school district. You know, do you want to see if you can get into her class? My parents tried to expose me to positive role models pretty early on in life. So, I mean, what better way to do that than to put me in a classroom with a woman with a disability who is employed and teaching children? So, in second grade, that's where the direction of my life began to take shape. And I said, oh, I think I really want to be a teacher. So my teacher, her name was Mrs. Smith. I'm not making that up. That's not a pseudonym, Mrs. Smith. She was sort of the first inspiration I had to become someone who really took charge of her own life and said, hey, I'm going to grow up to have a job. I'm going to grow up to teach other children. I'm going to grow up to be just as successful as everybody else who I've seen as an adult. And so that was the first foray into self-directing my life. However, I did run into some setbacks with that because I had paraprofessionals for most of grade school and middle school, and paraprofessionals can be great in terms of supporting students, but they can also hold students back sometimes and make decisions for them. And I was having none of that. So by the time I got to middle school, I kind of fought off the paraprofessional. But the first point that I really want to drive home is if you are working to support somebody with a disability, whether it's in a classroom or another area of their life, make sure that you're letting them make as many decisions as possible and that you're not sort of putting what you think is best on that person. Of course, it's okay to support them, but whereas my family was trying to teach me to self-direct my life, the people at school were trying to teach me to bend completely to the will of authority, because what disabled person can make their own decisions? Clearly, we can't think for ourselves. We can't do anything for ourselves. That seems to be what the notion was. And mind you, I went to school. I'm 25, so I went to school starting in 1996. So that was only like 6 years after the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed. So they were still working out the kinks, and I think they're still working them out today, but you know, we're getting there. So next slide, please. Okay, good. I forget it's not changing on my computer. So this is an article. I apologize. It's so small you probably can't read it, but I actually got my first taste of speaking and advocating for myself when I was about 8 years old. My cousin organized a disability awareness event, and this was right around the time that I started gaining consciousness of the fact that I was different from other people. So that's when I wanted to educate people in a broader sense. So my life began to take shape in the direction of becoming an educator. And I would talk to people about how I understand why people stare at me. It's because I'm different. It's because they're curious, but I don't think they mean any harm. And so that was where my consciousness was by the time I was 8 years old. And during that time, I was beginning to understand that just because I was different didn't mean that I couldn't still have control over making decisions for myself. So that was my first foray into, I would say, more professional advocacy if you count professional as my cousin bought me a necklace from a department store as my payment when we were done. So, you know, I think I made out like a bandit on that one. And then things started to go, next slide please, to a bit of a national scale. I went to a camp for people with physical disabilities, and a talent agent from Sesame Street called them and said, hey, we're looking for a kid with a disability to play a kid with a disability. Do you have anyone? And so me being a smart-mouthed little 10-year-old, they were like, sure, we have someone if you can deal with her staff. So I auditioned, and I actually ended up with a part on Sesame Street for about a year, educating children with disabilities. So you can clearly see a theme here. I was educating about disability. I was focusing on raising awareness. I was hanging out with Big Bird and Elmo, all part of the job. But actually, these are screenshots from my first episode. So you'll see I'm hanging out with Elmo, Big Bird, Telly Monster, Oscar, and the woman with me on the bottom. She was playing my mother in the show. And the reason this is important is because it was the first time that I started to realize that something that I was doing could make a difference. I understand that not everybody is going to end up on Sesame Street. That was honestly a freak occurrence for me. I think it was just right place, right time. But it's helpful for someone so young to get the sense instilled in them that what they say matters. I don't care if it's on a national scale. I don't care if you're talking to your family in your living room. You need to instill in young people with disabilities that if they say something, it's going to have an impact on someone. And for me, Sesame Street happened to be that turning point. And I hope that even if other children did not have that same turning point, being on Sesame Street, maybe they saw me and had a similar thought process, or maybe their parents saw me and said, hey, well, if that girl is being independent, then my child can also be independent. So that was always top of mind for me, was educating other children and parents and supporters and letting them know that your child or you can make your own life decisions. And that theme followed me throughout the rest of school. So I'm going to go quickly through the next couple slides because I want to really get to the meat of my presentation. This, believe it or not, is not it. And then we're going to move on to some group work after that. So next slide, please. Okay, so these are index cards with different questions. And by middle school, I began to realize that educating is great, but it's also really important to allow the opportunity for people to ask questions. So I was raised to be a curious person, and I realized that other people might be curious about me. So from that, I started an event at my school, and I allowed people to write anonymous questions on index cards to me. I combed over them, picked the ones that I wanted to answer, and sort of did a whole myths and facts about disabilities kind of event. So at that point, I was realizing that I can't just expect people to understand me without advocating for myself. So this was my attempt at helping people have some insight into what life is like with a disability. And then I'm going to say next slide probably 2 times over, if that's okay. And if we can go to the next one, I'm going to skip this one. Okay, cool. Thank you. So now we are on to college. So this is an article. Then I think that the title of the article really encapsulates everything that I had been striving for so long. So it is Ready, Willing, and Very Able. And I was covered in the magazine that my college puts out. It's Adelphi University. That's where I went to school. And that was sort of a culminating moment for me when I realized that other people also perceive what I'm doing as important in educating people. But it was also right around the time that I had a little bit of a crisis, because I had been planning on being a high school English teacher, and that just went completely south when I was in my second year of college, because the professor who was running the teaching program told me that they weren't really sure how somebody with a disability was going to become a teacher. Despite the fact that I had had a teacher with a disability, despite the fact that I thought I was perfectly capable of becoming a teacher, they said, I'm not really sure how you're going to do this. I don't think you can be a student teacher. This is not for you. So I think that was a blessing in disguise, actually, because I completely changed career paths from my plan to be a high school English teacher, and I said, okay, I'm just going to educate in bigger settings. I'll be a disability advocate. I had literally no idea what that meant at the time, how I was going to make money off of that, anything like that. But my parents said, okay, is this the direction that you want to take? And I said, I really think it is. And they said, okay, so we're going to support you in pursuing that particular direction in your life, which explains me being here today. It was all because of the people who were supporting me to choose the direction and change the course that my life took. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see I did in fact manage to graduate. I did not graduate with a teaching degree. I actually graduated with a degree in English, and everyone thinks, oh my gosh, a degree in English must be the most useless thing ever, which is also what I thought, but turns out it was pretty versatile. I got pretty lucky. So if we could just go to the next slide really quickly. So here is when I got my first taste of realizing that I was no longer going to aim for writing on a chalkboard. I did a summer internship in Washington, D.C., and that really explains why I'm here, because I interned for the Association of University Centers on Disabilities, of which there is a representative from a USED in the room. Sorry to put you on the spot. So a University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities. Did I get that right? Okay, that's quite a mouthful. So from there, that's when I really started connecting with the broader disability community. And that is how I met the lovely Susan, who you will hear from later. And that is how I ended up here in Rochester. Otherwise, I never would have been here. So all of the support that I had to make these decisions along the way was extremely important in getting me to where I am. Next slide, please. I suppose it's a little bit meta to show this, speaking while I'm speaking, but here's my bigger classroom. So I guess you're all my students today, and I really appreciate that. And on that note, I want to share a little bit about the people who actually got me to this point, the people who were supportive of me from day one. So if we go to the next slide, it's actually going to be a quick video that I would love to show you.
Hi, my name is Emily Ladau, and this is my mom, Ellen.
Hello.
As you can see, we both use wheelchairs because we have a genetic physical disability called Larson syndrome that affects our joints and muscles. We're so often told that we shouldn't become parents because people believe that we're incapable of raising a child. But my mom is proof that this couldn't be further from the truth.
When I became pregnant, a sonogram did reveal that my baby would have Larson syndrome. Of course, I was then concerned about the challenges of being a disabled parent of a disabled child. I had a lot of anxiety about it, thinking that she would resent me, or, just knowing that she would go through certain experiences that I went through that were painful.
Turns out my mom didn't need to be so worried. She's a wonderful mother. Unfortunately, though, according to a report by the National Council on Disability titled Rocking the Cradle, Ensuring the Rights of Parents with Disabilities and Their Children, children of parents with disabilities are separated from their parents at disproportionately high rates. The report points out that the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 forbids the child welfare system from presuming that parents with disabilities are unfit.
One day when Emily was younger, we were leaving a medical office, and Some woman put together that I passed on the disability to my child, and she made a comment, "Look at what that mom did to her baby." I didn't respond because I was so stunned that somebody would say something that cruel.
But the thing is, no one with a disability should ever be made to feel guilty like that for having children. Sure, we had some bumps in the road as I grew up, but thanks to my mom and dad, I've always been safe and cared for. I live a full life, and I know I am always loved. We're a lot like any other mother-daughter pair, watching our favorite guilty pleasure TV shows together, shopping together, and of course, cooking together.
Parents with disabilities need support and resources just like any other parent.
My mom and I are asking you, please, don't just support the rights of parents with disabilities because it's the right thing to do. Respect them and recognize that people with disabilities can be great parents too.
Wait, you have to do that again. I was not prepared for that.
Written and directed by Emily Ladau. Special thanks to Ellen Ladau, Mark Ladau, and Brittany Washington. For more videos from the disability rights movement, visit rootedinrights.org or follow us at Rooted in Rights on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and Rooted in Rights Video on YouTube.
So, of course, the subject here today is not parenting with a disability, which was the topic of that video, but the reason that I thought it was so important, oh no. Okay, that was the voice of one of my bosses, I could tell. So anyway, again, so the reason I wanted to show that video is because I think you can see, and I did throw you a little curveball there, my mother also has a physical disability. She has the same one that I do. So that's my little secret in terms of where I get so much of my support from somebody who literally understands inside and out what it's like to have a disability. That being said, I didn't want to lead with that, even though it's pretty common knowledge for people who have read some of my work. I wanted to address the fact that regardless of my mother already having experience with disability, she and my dad, who does not have a disability, were both extremely supportive of me in directing my own life. And I do think that that has to do partially with the fact that my mother already knows what it's like to grow up with a disability, become a successful person with a disability, a career woman, married, have a child. So I do think that I was privy to a privilege in a way, but I also think that my parents serve as examples of what it means to be supportive of someone in leading their own life. So now I want to move on to talk about some of the concepts that we need to think about. Now that you have a little bit of my history, we're going to be talking more about how you can support other people or yourselves in self-directing your life. And to do this, we're going to need to break down some of the most important concepts surrounding disability. So, first one being high functioning or low functioning. How many people have heard functioning labels before, like this? Yeah, that's the most hands I've seen go up in the room today. Next slide, please. So, what's wrong with a function label? You're probably looking at me and you're thinking, oh my God, she is so high functioning. I don't know how anybody could possibly be as wonderful as she is. I'm really kidding. But, so the problem with functioning labels is that it assumes that there's this normal standard of function. So it assumes here's function, here's functionality, this broad concept of functionality, and you need to fall somewhere in the middle of that. You can't be on some lower end of the spectrum or some higher end of the spectrum. And I've had people come at me a lot with this and say, well, it's not really fair that you're talking about self-direction, or it's not really fair that you're talking about what a good advocate for yourself you are because you're so high functioning. And to that, I say that is complete nonsense, because anyone with a disability can take control over their lives in any ways that you support them to do so. My life could have easily taken a different direction if I didn't have those supports. So I think that high functioning and low functioning are completely unfair standards by which to label someone. And on top of that, You're basing it on inability rather than ability. Even if you're calling me high functioning, you're calling me high functioning in comparison to what? Someone without a disability is high functioning too then, if we're talking about it that way. So there's this unnecessary divide between people not only with and without disabilities, but people with different types of disabilities. I am in no way superior to somebody with a different type of disability than me. You are in no way superior to me or someone with a different type of disability than me. You know, there is no functioning label spectrum that's reasonable to use because we all function differently. I mean, I'm probably better at some things than you are, and I'm sure you're better at some things than I am. I can tell you right now, I bet a lot of people in this room are better at math than I am, because math is not my strong suit. So, you know, that's a silly example, but functioning is kind of a myth. Everyone functions differently. So I want you to keep that in mind as we are working through some of the group work that we're going to do today. And in addition to that, the next thing that I want to talk about, next slide please, inspiration or pity. So how many of you have either been called inspirational if you have a disability or have seen someone with a disability be called inspirational? How many of you called someone with a disability inspirational just for doing something like living their life? You can be honest. I'm not here to judge. I'm not here to judge. I'm here to judge a little, actually. Next slide, please. All right. So cover your ears. This is about to get a little PG-13 in here. I'm kidding. Inspiration porn. Have you heard this term before? Has anybody heard this term before? All right. So inspiration porn is a term that was developed by Stella Young when she was trying to address what it is to objectify someone with a disability for simply living their lives, for saying, you are so amazing for going out there and living your life in the morning. So this takes root in pity for disabled people for thinking that their lives are worse off than yours and assuming that anytime they do something that seems positive, that it's inspiring because they've overcome something. So I have here, and I have 2 slides of these. I could have made a million slides of these. Some headlines, some pretty simple headlines that I guarantee you every single one of you has seen scrolling through Facebook, and also guarantee that a couple people in this room have shared some of these articles. So I'm here to tell you why you shouldn't do that. But I'm also here to tell you that part of supporting people to self-direct their lives is recognizing that not everything is inspiring. Not everything is this big, amazing feat. You know, sometimes it's just living your life. You know, I mean, is it inspiring that I rolled out of bed this morning at some ungodly hour to be here? It's inspiring because I like to sleep late, not because I'm a disabled person who got myself out of bed. But we see headlines all the time, you know, for some pretty simple scenarios that otherwise would not be newsworthy. So luckily, I don't think I've ever seen a headline that says, girl in wheelchair got out of bed this morning. But I have seen a headline, and I don't have this one here actually, that says, deaf person plays on baseball team. Okay, so a person is playing baseball and they can't hear. That's cool. That's basically the story there. I could write a story called Hearing Person Plays Baseball too. Be a great story. Pretty much the same thing, except they can hear and the other person can't. And of course, what I have here on the slide, it's prom season right now. Has anyone seen a very inspiring promposal of someone asking someone with Down syndrome to the prom, and it's the greatest thing that ever happened, and it made it onto the world news because how sweet that someone cares about someone with a disability? Yeah, like inclusion is awesome. That is fantastic. But if one of those people did not have a disability, that would not be news at all. That would just be 2 people going to prom together having a good time. So I argue that we have to move away from the mindset of thinking that everything that someone with a disability does is the most amazing thing in the whole world, and recognize that they are, in fact, functioning in society just like we all are functioning in society. I mean, look at some of these headlines. Disabled boy in last place during a race inspires everyone. If it was a non-disabled person in last place, everyone would be like, oh, he's the loser. Why are we writing an article about him? You know, so it's this special treatment that people with disabilities tend to receive. And I wouldn't call it special in a good way. I would call it sort of isolating. So for me, if I finish last place in a race, you know, cool, you participated, good job, awesome. But I don't think that's newsworthy per se. I think it's, you tried really hard, you're gonna do better next time. You know, or person with a disability came in last place, but it's awesome that he ran the race anyway. Not, it's so inspiring that you lost. I mean, nobody would ever say that to anybody without a disability. And if they did, they're just being nice. So next slide, please. We have a few more. Here are the promposals. These drive me absolutely batty. I'm actually going to be working on a video later this month to debunk some of this. So can someone explain to me, you know, I'm going to put some people on the spot here, get a little audience participation. What is it to you if you have seen someone with a disability being asked to prom, per se, and it's a viral video? Is there something about it that makes you feel more emotional than if someone without a disability was asked? What is it that really sort of clinches you and makes you want to click share on that? This can be whether you've done it or not. This is more just speculation, talking about trying to get to the root of why we're differentiating between people with disabilities and people without for things like this. Anybody? Oh, yay.
I have a daughter who is in college, but a special ed college.
Sure.
And we had been going through years with trying to have her say, hi, my name is, and it was, she'd be almost there and then she would come back in. And my older daughter was like the star athlete, clean prom, everything. And she said, I want to be just like my sister. We tried to separate that to say, you are who you are and you are special. So when she kind of really stepped over that boundary and said, Mom, I asked. Because, you know, we're very old-fashioned, you know, because my parents live with us and they're like, oh, girls do not ask a boy out. The boy must ask the girl. You know, so we were trying to like, okay, it's okay. So when she actually made it to the prom and we went to the whole dress thing and everything, yes, we did do it to inspire her that she stepped over, she made progress, she should be proud of herself, and that she can do this. And then, you know, and we play it over and over again to say, okay, remember, this is one hurdle, there's many more. It's okay to fall.
Yeah, so I love how you explained that. And I think, I'm not sure if you think this, but you actually are proving my point right now, so this is actually really great. So people with disabilities are not necessarily here to inspire you. The important thing is that they're doing things for themselves. So while we're all here getting our particular warm fuzzies over these stories, this could be a particularly big barrier for someone with a disability to overcome, you know? So when we're talking about, oh my God, that's so sweet, oh my God, how beautiful and adorable. No, it's not adorable. That's like a big moment in somebody's life, you know, that we're sort of taking and reducing to this sappy headline here. So I really like the example that you gave, because the point is that you're taking it and you're using it as an example of how your daughter accomplished something. So it's not that everyone around her can feel all warm, fuzzy, take out the Kleenex, although you're her mom, so it's okay if you want to do that. But, you know, I'm sure my mom would do the same thing. but it's the fact that it's a moment for the person with the disability. People with disabilities don't exist for other people's emotions. We're also trying to navigate the world, too. So if somebody asked me to prom, for an example, I wouldn't really want that to be in the news because that's more of a personal moment of accomplishment for me. But it's also not really an accomplishment per se in the sense that, like, oh, person won first place in a race or something like that. It's just a personal moment. It's a personal accomplishment. So we have to be careful not to objectify these personal moments, but to use them as building blocks. So there needs to be a reason why we're moved by these moments. It can't just be to get your daily feeling good out of your way. It needs to be because we're recognizing the importance of including people with disabilities, of helping people with disabilities make strides in society. So I really liked that story. I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you. So next slide, please. So here's a quote from Stella Young, who I was mentioning before. Stella Young gave a TED Talk, one of the most popular TED Talks ever. And it's called I'm Not Your Inspiration, Thank You Very Much. And she talks about the concept of disability being a bad thing, disability ruining your life in some way. So she says, we've been sold the lie that disability is a bad thing, capital B, capital T. It's a bad thing, and to live with a disability makes you exceptional. It's not a bad thing, and it doesn't make you exceptional. So that is to say, I'm a person just as much as you're a person. There's nothing more inspiring about me in particular than there would be about you overcoming a personal barrier. If you're afraid of heights and you climb to the top of a mountain, that's a pretty big personal barrier to overcome. Just in the same way that if I overcame something, that would be a personal accomplishment for me. So that's how I choose to look at my disability, is that it's not necessarily something that I want other people to feel good about. It's something that I need to feel comfortable with. Next slide, please. So have we all seen this before? Have we all seen this image before? So that's Oscar Pistorius. He's a bad example because he murdered someone. Whoops. But so it says the only disability in life is a bad attitude. I hear this all the time. I want you to contemplate that for a second. We're going to go to the next slide, please. So here's what we call pity porn. Basically the same thing as inspiration porn, except you're sharing it because you feel bad for the person with a disability and it makes you feel better about your own life. So if you take a look, there are some screenshots of photos. One that has two women in wheelchairs, and it's kind of asking you to say, oh, look, these poor women, don't you think they're pretty? Share if you think they're pretty. And then this other girl who has a disability called progeria, and it says, like and reply if you think she's beautiful. And sure, that is great if you think she is beautiful, but also, some random person just took that picture, stuck it on the internet, and said, here, let's all start feeling sad for ourselves, or stop feeling sad for ourselves, rather, and start looking at all the people who are so much worse off than we are. Look at this poor girl. Tell her that she's beautiful. She needs to hear it once in a while. It's not genuine. It's very disingenuous when that happens. That's how I feel. If somebody shared my picture and said, like, so that you know that she's beautiful, I would not take that as a compliment. I would take that as someone thinking that I need someone to lift me up because I have nobody in my life who would do that, or because my life must be so sad and pitiful that no one's ever told me that before. And I understand that we live in a society where that might be the case because people are not very nice. But what we can do is talk about disability in more positive ways rather than sharing stories like this about why it's so heartbreaking that somebody has a disability. So next slide, please. There's also this picture, which I'm sure many of you have seen before. So if you think about getting up and going for a run in the morning, and you're like, oh my God, I'm so tired, I can't do it. And then you think, oh, but there are so many people who can't run. I have to run for all those people who can't run. I'm not missing out because I can't run. I'm just in bed, and you're the poor, sorry soul who's getting up and running. So you're not affecting my life. But for real, next slide, please. This is the crux of the issue, another quote from Stella Young. Those images objectify disabled people for the benefit of non-disabled people. So they're there so you can look at them and think that things aren't so bad for you and put your worries into perspective. I can't tell you how many times people have come up to me and say, gosh, your life must be so difficult. It makes me really appreciate how great mine is. Well, thanks. So I know that I threw a lot at you, and for some of you this may be some new stuff to wrap your mind around, but I am asking you to keep it, let it roll around in your head a little bit, and have an open mind because we're about to move into some group work. And as we move into group work, these concepts I hope will come into play in your conversations. And I hope that they're useful, that you'll carry them with you, that maybe you'll think next time you click share on that adorable promposal story and think about it more as, you know, a personal life moment for someone rather than something that you can share so everyone sees how magnanimous you are on social media, which I'm sure we've all done at some point. Look, I'm so, you know, focused on social justice. Let me just click share on all these things and do nothing about them. You know, I want us to focus today on putting some meaning behind our words and our actions when it comes to supporting yourselves if you have a disability or supporting other people with disabilities.